Kalen Drace had never lost a hunt in his life. He was the alpha king of the Ashvale Pack, the most powerful werewolf ruler in the northern lands. Tall, broad-shouldered, with silver eyes that could silence a room, and a voice that made grown warriors step back without thinking. He had fought his first battle at 17. He had taken the throne at 22. He had never, in all his years of ruling, been surprised by anything. Until the night his wolf said one word that changed everything. But that came later. First, there was the hunt. The trouble had started 4 days ago, at a border village called Ironmore. Kalen had ridden out to the ruins himself, even though his generals told him a king didn't need to see the damage personally. He had gone anyway. He always did. He believed a leader should look at what was lost and feel the weight of it, not just read about it in a report. Ironmore was gone. The homes were ash. The granary was a hollow shell of scorched stone. 3 of his pack warriors had been found at the edge of the village, killed in a way that carried the signature of a very old and very deliberate kind of violence. And on the eastern wall, someone had left a symbol burned into the wood, the crest of the Solène royal family, the ruling bloodline of the kingdom to the south. His jaw had tightened. His hands had gone still at his sides. The Solène family had been a problem for years. Border disputes, trade conflicts, whispered accusations, but this was no longer a whisper. This was a declaration. He had returned to his war camp that night and given one clear order: find them. His generals expected him to send his best trackers. Instead, he pulled off his riding coat, folded it over a chair, and said, "I am going myself." No one argued with the Alpha King. The last surviving heir of the Solène bloodline was running through his forest, and she had been running for 3 days straight. Princess Saraphene Solène was 23 years old, the youngest daughter of a king who had died 6 weeks ago, under circumstances that the rest of the world had decided to stop asking questions about. She was not a general. She had never commanded an army. Her skills were different. She understood plants and roots and which berries could heal a fever and which could stop a man's heart. She knew forest paths that did not appear on any official map. She could move quietly and think quickly and stay calm when everything around her was on fire. Right now, everything around her was on fire, not literally, but close enough. She had escaped the capital city the night it fell, through a passage beneath the library that her father had shown her when she was 9 years old and told her she would never need to use. She had taken 3 things: a cloak, a knife, and a leather satchel full of documents that she had spent the last 2 months quietly collecting. Those documents were the reason she was still running, instead of stopping to rest. They were also the reason she could not get caught. She knew the Alpha King was behind her. She could feel it, not in any magical way, just in the way that the forest had gone quiet since yesterday morning. The kind of quiet that meant something much larger and more dangerous than she was had entered the territory. She pressed herself against trees when she heard movement. She changed directions at streams so her scent would scatter. She slept for 2 hours at a time and woke herself without an alarm, because her body had learned, very recently, to treat rest as a luxury it could not fully afford. On the 4th morning, she ran out of luck. The frozen river appeared out of nowhere, or rather, it appeared because she had taken a wrong turn in the dark, and now stood at its edge with nothing but cracking ice in front of her, and a presence behind her that she could feel the way you feel a storm before it arrives. She turned around. He stepped out of the tree line, and he was, genuinely, the most physically imposing person she had ever seen in her life. She had expected that. What she had not expected was the expression on his face. Not rage, not the cold satisfaction of a predator who has finally cornered his target. He looked almost confused, like something had just happened to him that he had not planned for. But the confusion lasted only a second. Then his face went completely still, and he crossed the distance between them in a few long strides, and before she could do more than raise her chin, he had pressed her back against a birch tree with one hand flat against the bark beside her head. His silver eyes looked straight into hers. "Saraphene Solène," he said. His voice was exactly as deep and controlled as the stories described. "You're going to come with me." She met his gaze without blinking. Her heart was hammering. She refused to let it show anywhere on her face. "You're making a mistake, Alpha King," she said, keeping her voice steady. "And when you realize it, Your people will already be dead. Something moved through his expression. Something she couldn't quite read. He bound her wrists with a cord from his belt, not cruelly, but firmly, and turned her toward the trees. He did not speak again for a long time. The war camp was not what she expected either. She had expected a pit. She got a small room in the outer command building, with a cot and a lantern, and a door that locked from the outside, but was, structurally, not actually a prison cell. One of his soldiers brought her bread and water without being asked. She sat down at the small table, opened her satchel, and got to work spreading out the documents she had been carrying since the capital. She did not know if anyone would ever look at them, but arranging them helped her think. At midnight, the door opened. Kalen stood in the doorway with his arms crossed. He was not wearing his riding armor anymore, just a dark shirt and trousers, which somehow made him look even larger. He looked at the documents spread across the table, then he looked at her. "I'm here to ask you questions," he said. "I know," she said. "Sit down then. This will take a while." He did not sit down, but he stepped inside and let the door close behind him, which was close enough. She began explaining. Not defensively, not frantically. Clearly, walking him through each piece of evidence the way she had organized it in her own mind. The timeline of events at Ironmore, the signature on the eastern wall that was the Solen crest, but used an older version of the design that the Solen family had not used officially since her grandfather's time. A version that appeared in a specific historical archive that very few people had access to. The pattern of forged intelligence reports that had been fed to both kingdoms over the past 3 years, creating friction that shouldn't have existed. The name that appeared in the margins of 2 separate documents, connected to supply routes and messenger paths that ran directly through Ashvale territory. Lord Aldrich Voss, his own chief war counsel. Kalen listened. He did not interrupt. She found herself noticing that about him. Most people with power filled silence with their own voice. He let her finish. Then he left without saying a single word. She sat in the dark for a long time, wondering if she had just made things worse. He came back before dawn. He sat down this time, across from her, and folded his hands on the table. He had clearly not slept. "I read them," he said. "All of it." She waited. "The documents check out," he said. "The archive reference, the forged courier seals. I had 3 of my own people verify the timeline independently, without telling them why." He paused. "Your father didn't order the attack on Ironmore." Something cracked, quietly, somewhere inside her chest. She had known this for 2 months. She had been carrying this knowledge through forests and sieges and sleepless nights. But hearing someone else say it out loud, someone who had been hunting her, someone who had every reason to want her to be guilty, made the ground feel slightly different beneath her feet. She did not cry. She had done her crying in the early days, alone, and she was not going to do it here. "What are you going to do?" she asked. He looked at her directly. "Whatever it takes to fix this," he said, "starting with Aldrich." She nodded once. Then he added, quietly, "I owe you an apology." She blinked. She had not expected that either. "You do," she said simply. She was not going to pretend otherwise to make him feel better. His mouth almost moved into something that was not quite a smile, but was not nothing either. "That's fair," he said. The War Council the next morning was the most tense gathering anyone in the Ashvale camp could remember. Kalen stood at the head of the table and presented the evidence. His voice was flat and factual. He laid out each piece the way Saraphene had laid it out for him, because she had done it well, and there was no point changing something that worked. His generals listened. Some of them went pale. Others went very still in the particular way that meant they were recalculating everything they thought they knew. And then Saraphene walked in. She had washed the mud off her face and borrowed a clean shirt from the camp stores. She stood straight, and she did not look at the floor. Several of the generals stared. One of them started to protest. Her presence, her standing in the room, the implication of what it meant. Aldrich Voss stood up and called her a liar. She looked at him with perfect calm and named the exact date, the exact messenger route, and the exact seal number on the forged intelligence report that bore his authorization. The room went very quiet. Aldrich moved toward her. It was not a calm or measured movement. It was the movement of someone who had just realized the walls were closing in, and had decided to do something reckless. He never reached her. Kalen moved first. He stepped directly between them in a single motion, and the sound that came from his chest stopped every person in that room cold. It was not a shout, it was not a command, it was something lower and older, and absolutely final, the kind of sound that the wolf part of every person present recognized on an instinctive level. Their king was not protecting an enemy prisoner. Their king was protecting his mate. Several people around the table looked at each other. No one said a word. Aldrich Voss was taken into custody within the next 30 seconds. That evening, Kalen walked Saraphene to the edge of the camp himself. The sun was setting over the tree line, turning everything gold and gray. She had her satchel over her shoulder, lighter now, since the documents had been logged as official evidence and no longer needed carrying. She stood at the boundary of the camp and looked out at the road that would take her south, back toward what remained of her kingdom, back toward a future she hadn't had time to think about yet. "You're free," Kalen said. He was standing beside her, looking at the same road. "No conditions, no debt. You can go." She noticed that his jaw was very tight. "Why are you clenching your jaw?" she asked. He didn't answer. "What does your wolf want?" she asked. A long pause. The wind moved through the trees. Somewhere behind them, the camp continued its evening routines. Fires being lit, horses being settled, voices carrying across the cooler air. "You know what it wants," he said, very quietly. She did know. She had known since that moment at the frozen river, when she had looked up at him and seen that split second of confusion on his face. The face of a man who had just had the ground shift under him without warning. She understood it differently now. She understood what the bond between wolfmates meant, what it felt like from the outside when it arrived uninvited and absolute. She also understood that a bond was not a cage. She had spent enough time around him now to see that he understood that too, which was perhaps the most surprising thing she had learned about the Alpha King. She turned back toward the camp. He exhaled slowly beside her. "You didn't say anything," he said. "I didn't need to," she replied, and kept walking. They talked that night for a long time, sitting in the open doorway of the command building with mugs of something warm between their hands, while the camp settled into quiet around them. He told her about Ironmore, not the political version, but the real one, the names of the 3 warriors who had died there, and what they had been like when they were alive. She told him about her father pressing wildflowers into the backs of old books, and reading aloud to his daughters on winter evenings, a man who had become a king because the bloodline required it, and had never quite stopped being slightly apologetic about the whole situation. They were both, she realized, people who carried things quietly, who had learned to manage loss by staying in motion, by solving the next problem, by being useful, who found stillness uncomfortable because stillness left room for grief. She thought that perhaps they would both need to get better at stillness. Together. The mate bond settled between them somewhere around midnight, not in a dramatic rush, but in the way that a door, long stuck, finally opens easily. A quiet click, a sense of something becoming right that had been slightly wrong before. 3 months later, the treaty between the Ashvale Pack Kingdom and the remaining Solent territories was signed at a long wooden table in a neutral city, witnessed by 4 other kingdoms and 2 pack councils. Saraphene stood at Kalen's right side during the signing. His generals had stopped looking surprised by this. His wolf had been quiet for months, the deep, settled quiet of something that had found what it was looking for and had no further business being restless. After the signing, one of his oldest advisors leaned toward him and murmured that the political alliance had been well handled. Kalen looked at Saraphene, who was calmly reviewing the final copy of the treaty, with the focused expression she wore when she was making sure all the details were exactly right. "It's not a political alliance," he said simply. His advisor looked between them, then wisely decided not to pursue the topic. Outside, the afternoon sun was doing its best over a city that had spent the better part of a year preparing for a war that would not happen now. Children were playing near the fountain in the square. A vendor was selling something that smelled like warm bread and spiced apples. Saraphene finished reviewing the treaty, looked up, and found him watching her. "Done," she said. "Good," he said. They walked out into the ordinary afternoon together, and the war was over, and it was enough.